Welcome to Rockstar Doctor Life. I'm Alyssa Longo, and each episode, my guests and I will bring you fresh, fun ways to rock your life as a health professional and create a business that aligns with who you are and the life you want to live. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rockstar Doctor Life. I am always excited to have a great conversation with a great chiropractor, and today is no different. Joining me today is Dr. Tamara MacIntyre.
Hello. Thanks
for joining me. There's so many questions I want to ask you, and because I've got to know you and your wife Monique a little bit over the last year, and I've certainly watched all the cool things you guys are up to. But I love to start the show with you just give us a little bit of a snapshot of who is Dr. Tamara. What are you doing right now? And then we'll go from there.
Great. So I was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I'm Canadian. Went to the University of New Brunswick, did a master's degree at Carleton University. And then I went to chiropractic college in Davenport, Iowa. And I went during a super exciting time, I think, for Palmer. And really my education, I loved it. And I met so many amazing chiropractors and left Palmer, did a scratch startup practice in Ottawa, Ontario, was in practice for 13, almost 14 years, made a really big shift back in 2013. I joined the faculty at a chiropractic college in 2014, stayed and taught as a full faculty for a year and a half, and then I became a senior administrator and I was in charge of clinical education. That finished last year, and my wife and I have launched a foundation that is education, service, and community oriented. And we, are really working with young docs and students and helping them, really sort of traverse that really kind of difficult, first 3-5 years in practice. So that's who I am.
With all that experience, the first thing that comes to mind is what would be the biggest lesson? I mean, you've had the chance to share chiropractic and share your knowledge in clinical practice, as well as in a teaching role, and then in an administrative role.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever expected your life journey within chiropractic to go that way.
No, I've always known like academic and my thinking brain is a real strength. And I've always been somebody who's, since the time I was a little kid, I've always been really intellectually curious. And so I've really to be in practice and to use that knowledge set and to, work with patients and really sort of devise a way that my brain works and how that works for me and how I connect on an intuitive level and where my gifts are. And then going into back to a chiropractic college where 100% of the students, it's really unique. 100% of the students want the job that you have. They want your knowledge set. So it's, I think, unlike a lot of other educational, sort of space where everybody shows up for a class, for a content. I'm sitting with a group of individuals who want to know every aspect of what I did in practice. And then on the other hand, we also know that, chiropractic is a little difficult, not just from an education perspective, but our profession sort of is filled with conscious contrarians. We're all there's a little rebel heart, I think, in a lot of us. And then when you go and you look at the way education is being formed and formatted, whether it's by regulators, whether it's across institutions. Melissa, I essentially sat 2 to 3 times a year in a room with clinic administrators from all around the world. And so I then got to see sort of all of the different ways with which education is being delivered. And it made me even more passionate about helping remedy some of the gaps so that we have chiropractors that are incredibly well-rounded in the science, the art, and the philosophy. And every institution in some way falls a little short somewhere. And sometimes those graduates, we know that most students choose a school based on location. And they don't necessarily realize what they got as an education until they go out and try to use it. And so the administrator part of me got to see that if a school's ultimate is to hand out degrees and not hand out an education, then that, in my opinion, is part of the reason why we have so many struggling chiropractors.
And so if you got to chance to see all these different gaps in the education, if you were to pull out a couple of them right now,
yeah,
and share them, like what were some of the biggest things that you saw?
we oftentimes see an education being delivered in a model that these students and the students that are going to school right now, it's just not the way their brain works. It's not the way they use information. The talking head with the PowerPoint slides that when you go to conferences, we're still being issued that way. That's just not the way this generation learns. And so the classroom time is not being used incredibly well. And what's happening is that so much of the licensing has been a rote memorization that the clinical pieces are just not coming together. And so if you memorize everything, they own some of the information for short periods of time, but then how actually does that come together? And then you have a seminar culture, which for the most part, students believe is an essential critical component to their ability to be successful. The only problem is the vast majority of seminars that they're paying for are technique-based. And you and I, as practicing docs, know that technique is such a small part of the bigger picture of skill set that we need to have. Yeah.
And then not to mention, there's so many different techniques and even so many different practice management organizations.
Totally.
And I imagine as a new grad now, it might be really confusing.
It's so confusing. It's so overwhelming. And then there's this other, complication, which is when I talk about the value system of this generation, I think when you're an educator, I think it's really, really important to know who you're actually providing the education to. And so understanding, it doesn't mean that everybody shares these values, but for the majority of students that are graduating from chiropractic college, we know statistically, we know exactly where their value systems lie. They value experience and they're willing to pay for it. And they want to create a change for humanity. They have big goals. And so they choose chiropractic because chiropractic can serve both of those things. But the education is not actually having that direct conversation to appeal to why they got into the profession to begin with. They're not motivated by money. When you see the marketing that says, the seminar for the people who like money, they want to be financially stable. There's a GIF that's been going around that, says millennials, and it talks about, the things that have happened in in their lifetime. And they said, the second time where they said it was only, that a recession, this was the only recession, it's a once in a lifetime recession that's going to happen, except they've seen it twice, and they've seen their parents struggle through, the mid, sort of the 2008, 2010 kind of time frame. And then they're seeing it now in their own career when they're meant to be building. And so they have a fiscal stability need that's just really they're not looking for excess. They're looking for foundational stability. And I think there's not a lot out there that's appealing to their value system right now.
So for any of the new grads listening to this show, what would be your biggest piece of advice?
They absolutely need to choose a mentor. They need to find somebody that has some shared values that speak their language. And I mean, for so many of us, coaching and mentorship has been part of the way we've navigated our career. And there's so many individuals out there offering that service. It works best when somebody can see you, can support you, can meet you where you're at, and help you grow in a manner with which you aspire to,
And knowing yourself and what you need. I love that you said at the beginning, you know yourself, that you're curious intellectually. And certainly in your journey, you've been able to use your skills that are unique to Dr. Tamara, to best serve people. How important do you think that is for everyone else to really get to know, to have a high level of self-awareness and to then be confident in pursuing, work that aligns with that?
Essential, because you can give yourself away in private practice. You can basically just tap your resources in giving without, and if you don't know how to fill your own cup, and then you wonder why you feel so exhausted at the end of the day. I used to tell students, I said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first started practice, the idea of going for a run after I finished in the office, I just didn't have that kind of energy reserve. I was lucky if I could get home and make myself some dinner. you know. But once you realize how to take care of yourself and that you need, practices at the beginning of your day to ground yourself, you need some kind of ceremony as far as what you leave at the office and what you choose to take home. My favorite thing was getting on my bike and going for a long ride or going for a run after a work day, because it was like the most calming, and I had the energy reserve to do it. And I think if you don't know who you are, patients will show you.
Right.
They will pick, they have this, the patient interaction just has this beautiful opportunity to just really keep showing you and keep showing you and keep showing you. And then once you become aware, then there's no going back, And so when I'm working with docs now, it's that conversation that, like, the very first conversation we have is, do you know who you are in the dynamic of doctor patient?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of my favorite sayings that I feel like it comes up a lot in this show is, trying to be someone that you're not is exhausting. And it's the fastest way to an unhappy life.
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
docs insert themselves into a model of success that they think is supposed to make them happy. And then they realize and I think that happens to all generations. They realize, yes, it's not really what I thought it was going to be. I have all these things I thought were supposed to make me feel happy, and yet they don't.
Totally.
And, they're questioning things in their 40s and 50s when they could have done it when they started to build their life and practice that way instead.
Right. Well, and that's definitely the hope. The hope is that you've done the work at the beginning to the best of your ability to identify, who am I? What are my goals? What are my values right now? And what's the next best thing or the decision I can make, or what's the next best decision that I can make that's going to actually allow me to meet myself where I'm at, and that's going to meet my goals as I see them, recognizing that we grow and change and evolve, and that flexibility and that adaptivity and just self-worth piece is just something that you need to be really aware of. Otherwise, you absolutely find yourself in situations without your consent, because you actually didn't bother to have the questions asked of you.
Yeah. And it reminds me, we need to be asking these questions of ourselves, not just once, not just at the beginning of our career. I think we should do it every, as your relationship status might change, where you live, your needs of your extended family. If you have children, your children's needs change, and that's constantly causing a shift in us. And it can absolutely affect your practice. And if you're not paying attention to it, you just keep on this hamster wheel of this is what I'm supposed to keep doing. And I have so many doctors reach out to me and talk, they join the programs and stuff. I'm like, I forgot who I was. I had my kids and I kept going in practice. And I'm realizing now I feel like I'm missing out on things with my kids, but I still want to have this kind of practice. And all this confusion can set in if you don't continue to ask yourself the question of, who are you and what do you actually want? And then confidently know that you can actually create that.
Totally.
You might have to make some conscious choices that are difficult, but it's absolutely possible.
Absolutely. And I think necessary too, because it would be unrealistic to think that the decisions that you made, 15 years ago when you chose to go into practice is, going to be what your needs are right now. And for all those exact reasons that you just mentioned.
Yeah. And, speaking of knowing yourself and your identity, something that you alluded to in our pre-chat was that, you've had a period of time where you've not been in active practice and you've not been in a faculty role, and that it's given you time to explore your sense of identity for yourself at this stage of your life. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm a really good worker. I, for so much of my life, have defined myself by work. I mean, because I am curious, I like a good project, I like researching, I like organizing and putting plans in place and watching them happen. And so I really never questioned that kind of intensity that I was living my life. It was fulfilling. And so then, last year I had this really unique experience, and it kind of happened, we sort of say, like, professionally and personally, there was this really lovely moment. And so my whole work situation changed without really me seeing it coming. So all of a sudden there was just this stop, and I got to evaluate, like, okay, I've done a lot of things in my professional career. I really loved what I was doing and knew that I was creating value in that role. And then all of a sudden I got to go, okay, well, wait a second. Like, who am I without the work? And while I have and have always had lots of self-care practices, the other uniqueness of what happened last year is that, so my father passed away when he was 48. And I remember when I was 36 going, would I change anything? If I knew I only had 10 more years to live, would I change anything? And at 36, I went, no, absolutely not. And so, my dad was diagnosed at 46. I turned 46, I turned 47 and I'm aware that I'm in that same window. Well, he passed away when he was 48 and I'm 48. And so I'm going into my 48th year in life. And all of a sudden I have this place where I've officially outlived my dad. And my work, which I actually really at this point in my life, I know what my gifts are. I know what I'm really good at. When I show up 150%. It's just, that part of me, I know so incredibly well and have such awareness because I did exactly what you did. What you said is I knew who I was in practice and I really enjoyed learning about myself that way. So then all of a sudden that work professional part, which I actually presumed was a lot of me personally, was no longer there. And that just got pushed aside. And then I had this beautiful window of time where it was like, wow, like, what do I do with my time? And really, if I actually get into the rhythm and flow of my life without work, what does that look like? I spent a month in Japan, just in a pottery studio in rural Japan, just sculpting. And I probably am, taking care of my physical vessel better than I've ever taken care of it, which feels fantastic to counter the personal part of my dad not having taken care of his personal vessel. And so, yeah, like I just had this, I feel like that now I have this whole other armament of reflection when I'm choosing what my next stuff is going to be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the luxury and privilege of having had this much time in that way, which I realize people don't get. And I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, two things come up for me. One is like 48 is so young nowadays. So, I mean, you have, and we think that it's always been young, I guess, but our lifestyles are different. And so many people are starting their lives again in a whole new way. They're going through a divorce or relocation or something shifts. They're changing careers. And there's an opportunity there to constantly be redefining yourself and making changes that to align with really what resonates with you. If you're open, if you're courageous enough to pursue that. Yes. The other thing that comes to mind is, we're recording this right now in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And a lot of doctors are struggling because their sole identity is within their practice. Totally. And if their practices have been asked to be closed, emergency care, they're practicing in a model that maybe doesn't resonate with them, or they've had to officially close their doors temporarily, it's a huge gap and a huge loss for docs. Absolutely. And so do you have any specific advice or encouragement for doctors who might be feeling, that way in their life right now, just a little bit stuck or a little bit lost or not sort of knowing where to start getting to know themselves again?
I mean, I'm the first person to sort of say, like, my ego and my work were closely tied, and I mean, there's this lovely thing that happens after 40 where, the ego gets overthrown and you recognize it. But the truth is, hey, look, like it drives us sometimes. And I think that in practice, when you are the personality, when you are the individual that's working that, volume and that kind of connection with other human beings, there's something really lovely about you being able to facilitate in that role. And so I think, when you put ego aside and when you're really, for some people, it's really scary to start to think about going inside and actually really looking at self. And I think this is a really great time to kind of reflect on who am I in the practice and who am I outside the practice. And, when I talk about our natural flows or our natural rhythms, it's like, I was working with a young intern and they're used to getting up at 6:30, 7 o'clock and being at the university. And, and I said, what's your natural rhythm? Like and she said, I don't really know. And I said, well, why don't you try? And she said, how do I do that? I said, you don't put an alarm clock on and you just start waking up and you get up when you feel like it. And you go to bed when you feel like it and see what that looks like a week from now. If you're somebody who's finding that you could, sleep in, then you have a question for yourself. Were you that depleted that you needed that kind of recovery that your body's actually now taking? Or is that a certain level of depression, which is okay. Depression is a completely normal emotion in response to what's happening in your life. But if that's the way you're responding, then it's important to recognize what about that space can you learn and grow from, you know. Some people are spending more time, you know, cooking food. Some people are spending more time exercising. If you are choosing to do those things, then you want to, you know, I read this really great article by a trauma psychologist yesterday. And she said, you know, I'm really furious by reading all of these things. Like, if you haven't acquired a new skill on the other side of this, then you don't lack time, you lack discipline. And the trauma psychologist said, shame on you. Like, shame on you. Because not all of us need that level of push. And I think for most chiropractors, we're used to that rhythm of pace in our lives that we don't even know what our natural rhythm is going to look like when we just slow it down. And if you don't know how to slow it down and take care of yourself, the universe is going to figure out a way to take it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just the truth. Whether it's a relationship that's a casualty, whether it's an unforeseen, you know, issue with your vessel that's going to, you know, give you that pause. I mean, the body will say no at some point. And so I think this is a really good time of reflection. Where are you at, and what's your response to your life just coming to a halt? Do you know what to do with it? What's your natural flow and rhythm? Because that actually is some of your answers.
Mm-hmm. And also finding our sense of purpose defined in different ways. You know, I've often looked at, I don't know any other life than being a mom and trying to be in practice, because my first son was born 4 days after I graduated from CMCC. So I've always been like, how do I do both? And now he's going to be 18 and here I am. Yeah. But, you know, for me, it's like, what's my purpose in life isn't just like Dr. Melissa saved the world with, you know, amazing chiropractic care and change their health. It's also been like, my purpose is to be a great mom. And there have been many times in my career where I thought, maybe I need to sit back from my career and focus on this human might be the next world changer, you know, in a whole other way. And he needs my nurturing and my connection. And so I think it's important for us to take a step back and look at our purpose, not just with our work, but our purpose as humans. I mean, there's plenty of docs that they have charities that are close to their heart. They have extended family members that, you know, need their love and support. And that fills them with a sense of purpose that sometimes gets forgotten. So I think we have to be reminded of that. And, you know, all the time. So thank you for that. Yeah. You said earlier as well in our conversation that you feel like a lot of chiropractors have a rebel heart, you know, or conscious. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the divide, you know, we're pretty good at arguing, you know,
amongst ourselves,
you know, I mean, we really are. But I think that aspect of who we are, we go into a profession that's not, you know, that really sort of for the most part is a little bit it's non-normative. It's, you know, it's a little fringe. We already know, like, we spend so much time trying to, you know, learn how to explain what we do because we are prepared for people not knowing, not understanding, having an opinion about it. So we enter this profession to a certain extent, recognizing that, you know, we're not totally understood. So I think it pre-selects for somebody who's willing to roll with that. Like, that's just, it's like, I'm good with that. You know, you're going to be a what? You know, like, that's kind of who we are. The issue, though, is that we carry that within our own profession. It's not just an outward, you know, sort of perception of who we are as chiropractors. There's an incredible amount of divisiveness in our profession. And, you know, the politics are really tough, and we don't make room for a whole lot of others who choose or want to practice differently than we do. It's like there's just this real, you know, sort of linear focus, like, I'm going to decide what this profession is about. And institutions are individually doing the exact same thing. Like, this is what the profession's supposed to be, and this is what the profession's supposed to be. Not that there's enough room for all of us, and that different people are going to meet different people, you know, in the way they relate to their body, or that there's different stages of healing, and we might, you know, be perfectly positioned as chiropractors to meet them at different stages with different techniques, you know? So yeah, I mean, our politics are really tricky. I mean, I don't know how many other professions have as many different professional organizations you could join. And none of them like each other. you know, and so, yeah, I think that creates a real difficulty for docs to try to find themselves. You know, it's like if you find a technique that you absolutely love and you love everything about the technique and everything about the practice management companies that help you how to, you know, that show you how to run that technique, perfect. But what about the rest of us?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we're tough in that way. I think that our profession is tough. And, you know, half of all of our students are female.
Mm-hmm.
Only 1 in 4 practicing docs are women. So where are we? We're not in leadership roles. We're not running colleges. We're not running political organizations. And we're a significantly smaller percentage in practice. And it's, you know, it's always said that, well, it's because of exactly the reason that you mentioned, you know, that it's a child rearing responsibility issue. Not necessarily. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of other layers. And I think that the politics are really tough to find yourself in, you know?
So do you have any other data or stats on where all those other women are? If there's only 1 in 4 in practice, but half are graduating?
Nobody does the stats. Nobody does the stats. And so, you know, I can tell you, you know, the individuals that, you know, that sort of really hearted woman who is wanting to help people and is graduating from chiropractic college, like so much of what the offerings are coming in a masculine language. Right? It's coming in that classic form that is not totally relatable to a lot of women in the way we navigate the world. And so, you know, we communicate differently. We are walking into a doctor's role. I mean, I think for most of us as females, we've answered our own office phone at some point and asked, you know, when somebody asks to speak to the doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all had that experience.
Had a male CHA at one point, and it was hilarious because people would come in and if I was standing next to him, they would start speaking to him like he was a doctor. And a few times and he would look at me. We had some fun with it a few times,
of course,
but it was, I mean, and that was probably 10 years ago. So compared to now.
Yeah. I mean, sexism is a real thing. You know, when you are a woman assuming the role of doctor and the dynamics that play out. And, you know, I was speaking to a chiropractor who teaches ethics, but also teaches ethics to chiropractors who have lost their license because of ethical violations in the US. And so he's basically like on contract to help, you know, with some of the post training necessary for these individuals. But he also teaches ethics in a chiropractic college. And one of the things that we talked about sexism, and he, you know, said that when he's teaching, like he brings in a lot of female chiropractors, and he actually will have them go through their experience as the doctor, like patients who point to their pain spot on their, you know, the doctor's body. You know, how even just within technique, you know, you need to make modifications. And he actually will demonstrate have these docs demonstrate and play out these scenarios. And I think that conversation isn't oftentimes discussed. The people that mostly are teaching are not addressing those kind of issues. And I think, you know, for most of us as chiropractors, we've had that experience. We've all had that experience.
That I wanted to do a show about that because I've had men and women tell me stories about things inappropriately happening in their practices and how to navigate it. So, you know, there's respect and there's nothing, you know, obviously professionally the misconduct that comes out of it, but it's happened more often, obviously, than it gets reported and talked about.
Totally. And I mean, when I say sexism, sometimes it's presumed that I'm referring to a male who's sexist and, you know, the person that's experiencing the sexism is female. And I'm not talking about that.
No,
Women can be as sexist as men. And
absolutely.
and you can have some staunch feminists that come in in a male body. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that. And you're right, both genders are going to experience it. And I think it's an important conversation to have. I mean, I think that those are experiences that can change somebody's feeling of safety in the role as a chiropractor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame that we're not having those conversations.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for the reminder, because I think I'll put it back on my list of upcoming interviews to do. And you're also reminding me of the reason why back in 2018, I shifted the show to stop just speaking to women in chiropractic and to include conversations with men, because I love men and I love their energy and I love the ideas that they bring, but I also love women. I respect that we have some fundamental differences in communication, in business strategy, and that's why so many organizations benefit from having both parties and both types of people and all different types of people participate in discussions, because you bring those complementary approaches.
And it's totally okay to, there's a brand new forum that was created by two young students in California, and it's called Making Herstory. And it's not a women's only event, but they want to have that conversation. They want to talk about it. And so when I was speaking last year, I said, like, we have to decode the terms patriarchy because it has a definition. Let's just talk about what that is. Let's talk about what feminism is. And it's okay to have a strongly feminist slant in the conversations you want to have, Melissa. And those conversations include everybody on the gender continuum. That's an important place of safety that I think we have to acknowledge in our profession. And there's a lot of people that don't feel like the conversations that they need to have are being had. So that would be a great topic to cover.
Yeah, I think you and I will have to chat a little bit more when we wrap this up about how to make that happen.
Yeah.
But a couple of things, like, let's just totally switch gears now. You've talked about exploring, pottery in Japan and taking care of yourself. Like, what does Dr. Tamara do right now?
Yeah.
You're not immersed in work and the things that you're doing.
So I'm a runner, and I'm a road bike cyclist. So I am moved to Victoria, BC in beginning of October of last year. So I'm just discovering the mountains and the ocean riding and the sound of a seagull, and having them swoop in front of me when I'm actually on my road bike. And so I am not willing to compromise that time with myself anymore. Hard to manage when I was in private practice, easier to manage when I had more of a 9-to-5 job. But where I am right now, it's my running, my meditation, my riding time. Those are all non-negotiables as far as the things that I need to do. I love cooking, and I am gluten-free, minimal dairy for myself, not so much for my wife. And so I love cooking, and that's part of my passion. I probably bake a little bit too much, but that works out fine to counter my exercise. So that's who I am. I've always got books on the go. I think I really understand my rhythm now. And so those are the things that I really love.
I'm realizing why I like you, because those are all the things that I love. I love to cook. I like to be on my bike, and I'm always reading. So speaking of reading, what are some of your favorite resources or things that you want to share with doctors as far as, personal development or business development or anything that you're reading right now that's really inspiring that you want to share?
I'm doing a little bit of reading right now on women in Buddhism. So that probably, based on our conversation, is not super surprising. There's an author out of the University of California at Berkeley, and I forget her name in this moment, who does a fair amount of writing talking about Buddhism and women, which is, very much in the same light. Gloria Steinem has a new book that just came out. And I was never a young woman who really actually understood Gloria Steinem's work until much later on in my life. And her newest book is actually really quite great. For docs that are out there as far as resources and learning, I mean, I would say ask in about a month, because there's been so much new content that's been rolling out in the last couple months. You know, podcasts and availability of that kind of one-on-one kind of exchange. And I've been introduced to probably a few more just on my own in the last, in the last little while. Lauren Brunswick does a really great job with this She Slays podcast and putting good content out to support women. And I've been part of a few more podcasts to be introduced to some of the other content that's out there. So I would say there's those. Academically, I have a lot of different resources that I rely on. That tends to be sort of the more boring content that people don't necessarily care about. But I do have my doctorate in natural medicine, but functional medicine is really sort of everything philosophically comes from chiropractic, but functional medicine sort of is another area of interest for me. And that's, I would say I'm in that realm.
Yeah. So what are you working on now?
So I have a small clinical mentorship group. So it's an intimate group of new grads and docs who are looking to hone their clinical skill set. And so we're about halfway through. I do it in a 90-day kind of capacity, and we sort of do, who you are. We do the doctoring kind of thing, and then we talk about you as a clinician in a practice and in your practice. So we sort of do it in those parts. So I'm about halfway through that. We just decided through our foundation, there's a lot of new grads and soon to be new grads that had plans in place that have just fallen apart. And so we decided to create a safety net for them. So we just started really, we're just sort of calling it the Prana practice mentorship. And it's really a once a week with some action steps. It's like, what are the most essential key things that, we can help you, put one foot in front of the other to help make some decisions to get yourself on the other side. And so we have a group of 20. We're super excited about working with that. Started last week. So we're doing it that. And then I have had a lot of requests. Like I continually get requests for assistance with clinical cases. So it's kind of always been my thing where chiropractors, even when I was in practice, would write and say, what do you think? Here's this case. What do you think? And so I'm just in the process right now of working on how could I provide that level of consultation for docs in a regular formatted kind of way, where they have access to a backup clinician, and so, so that's my project I'm digging into right now.
Sounds fascinating. And it sounds like a great culmination of all of your years of experience.
That's what it feels like. It feels like, when people are needing clinical consultation, sometimes it's because the gaps aren't there or because they really know their scope and they really care for their patient base, but they're not even sure exactly what the options would be that would be congruent philosophically. It's like, I could send you to a medical doctor, or they've already been to the medical doctor and this is what they know. Now what? Like who would, what would that, where should I be sending them? And then there's the other obvious, which is a chiropractor who is having symptoms, who would prefer to ignore it, but doesn't want to go to the medical doctor because that's probably not what they're interested in. So what do they do? Right?
Who do they turn to for advice?
Who do they turn to? And even if it was just a consultation to go like, what are my options? And, are there any other ways that I could help my body take care of itself and have a consistent, congruent way to do that, and have a plan. Like, what should I be doing? Like, just tell me, let me give it a try. So I'm kind of in that space myself.
What, I could keep talking to you and go pour myself a coffee or a glass of wine, but we need to wrap things up here. And, I just want to ask you, like, what keeps you inspired? What keeps you inspired to keep asking questions and doing the work that you're doing right now?
Because I know that our model and our ideas of health in our society don't work. I would say, like, right now in present moment, we are in a perfect place where I think people have just come to realize that maybe their investment in their health was not enough. And we as chiropractors are so perfectly positioned to support that process. Because we have always educated based on fact and providing hope and guidance in a regular, sustained contact kind of way. We don't motivate based on fear. You know what? They're already fearful. If they have not made the investment in their health, they're already fearful. So for me right now, I would say I feel really inspired to support chiropractors in being able to get that message out. I feel really, really strongly, health is a responsibility, and it's our birthright, and it's a gift. It's not something that we aspire to. You actually own it. You own it. And this physical vessel that we live in is the only, I used to lecture to young kids in junior high, and I used to say, how many of you want to be healthier than your parents when you are your parents' age? And the vast majority of them would always raise their hand. And I would say, well, you know what? This is the only vessel you've got. And if you are going to experience this world energetically, spiritually, emotionally, then you better learn how to take care of this vessel. And
it's amazing that we need to hear that as doctors.
Totally.
Because sometimes you forget. Yeah,
totally. But it's absolutely true. And I think because of my early introduction to health and watching my dad, I feel really strongly, and it's what keeps me going, because I wish he had known what I know about how to take care. And so the more people I can get that message out, the more I can share that we have far more control over how we feel every day than our conventional model would tell us. Then we wouldn't be so afraid right now when we're watching what's happening in the world, because we will have known that we would have made the investment into ourselves as a long-term investment, that this short-term little thing that's happening would not have us so concerned. So.
And it reminds me, like, for me, responsibility is something that's really important to me, because I feel like we all have to take responsibility for our own behaviors and for the choices that we make. No one else is going to do it for you. Maybe that's the entrepreneur in me. That's just like, we have a choice to make things happen. No one else, we're not victims in this life. Totally. And if it's your health, if it's the quality of your relationships, if it's your work, ask the questions and then take action to make it align with what you actually want. 100%.
100%. And I think that rings so incredibly true. And I think we're at this really beautiful place right now where the public en masse, my hope is that they are questioning that investment that they've made, or lack of investment that they've made, that's created this environment of fear for them as it relates to their health and the health of their families.
Okay, Dr. Tamara, I want to thank you for your time. Listeners, if you want to find out more about her work that she's doing, if you want to connect with her to help you with a case study yourself for someone in your practice, if you want to find out more about the Prana Foundation, be sure to check out the show notes and connect with Dr. Tamara further. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Find out more about today's guests and everything else that we talked about in the show notes. You can also find all this content and so much more, including videos, blog posts, and how you can work with me on the Rockstar Doctor Life website. If you haven't yet reviewed the show, we'd love it if you headed on over to iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review about what your thoughts are about future episodes for the show and what you like best. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram at Melissa Longo DC, and of course on Facebook. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.